My name is Vivian Harper. I am 62 years old, and for the past 15 years, I have worked the night shift as a cashier at a grocery store just outside Dallas. My hands still know the rhythm of scanning cans, counting small bills and folding paper bags. My body still remembers walking home in the dark after midnight. That is the truth of my life, simple and unpolished. Yet on Christmas night, in a glittering banquet hall filled with music and polished silverware, another story about me was told, a story that did not belong to me. The chandeliers above us shimmered like constellations. Glasses of wine clinked, laughter rolled through the room. My son Daniel, dressed in a tailored suit, stood tall with the confidence of a man admired by his peers. His wife, Melissa, sparkled beside him, the perfect hostess in a perfect world. They had rented the grand ballroom of the country club, and everyone important seemed to be there. Investors, clients, friends who wore diamonds like second skin. Daniel raised his glass, his smile wide and smooth. His voice carried through the air with the ease of a man used to applause. "Mom loves the Tesla I gave her," he said proudly. "She doesn't need the bus anymore. She drives in style now." The room erupted in polite laughter, clapping as though they had rehearsed. Melissa leaned in, her eyes glistening with satisfaction, nodding as if to confirm the truth of his words. Cameras flashed. The moment was immortalized in pixels and champagne. But my throat closed. My body froze. And before I could stop myself, words broke through my silence. "I still take the bus to work," I said quietly, my voice sharper than I intended. "Tesla, the car you speak of, I have never even seen it." It was not a shout. It was not a dramatic speech. It was a simple truth, but it landed like a stone-breaking glass. Melissa's hand trembled. Her wine glass tilted dangerously. She nearly dropped it onto the white linen tablecloth. A murmur ran through the crowd, a ripple of discomfort that spread from table to table. Faces shifted, eyes darted toward Daniel, toward me, toward Melissa. Daniel laughed, but it was the laughter of a man caught in the wrong room at the wrong time. He waved a hand casually and said, "My mother is confused." You know how age can play tricks on memory. His tone was light, but I could see the muscle in his jaw tighten. I stood there, silent now, the weight of my truth pressing heavier than the chandelier's glow. Around me, the sound of forks paused, and the orchestra faltered for just a second before continuing. My silence filled the room, louder than any accusation could have. In that moment, a line etched itself into my heart. "Im lang joy ki kon nang hon katieng het." Silence, I realized, sometimes carries more weight than a scream. The party continued, or tried to. Daniel moved quickly, changing the subject, raising another toast, thanking his guests. Melissa forced a smile, though her knuckles whitened around the stem of her glass. But the damage had been done. The truth had slipped into the room like cold wind through a cracked window, and no laughter could seal it shut again. I sat down slowly, feeling my pulse in my wrists. I thought of the bus seat I had taken that very morning, of the smell of worn leather and diesel, of the way I had counted my coins carefully before paying the fare. That was my reality. And yet here, in front of people who knew me only through Daniel's story, my reality had been erased, replaced with a fantasy that made him look noble, generous, untouchable. My hands rested on my lap. I felt the old ache of betrayal, not the sharp pain of a wound, but the heavy ache of carrying something too long. In the middle of that crowded room, surrounded by laughter and lies, I knew this Christmas would not end like the others. Something had shifted. Something inside me had opened its eyes. This was the beginning of a reckoning I had never asked for, but could no longer avoid. If you are still with me, listening to these first pages of my story, I ask you to stay. What happened after that Christmas dinner was not just about me or a car that never existed. It was about dignity, about the price of silence, about a woman who had given everything to her family and discovered she had been written out of her own life. So, lean in with me. Listen closely. Because sometimes the smallest truth whispered in a crowded room can set fire to the lies that once felt unbreakable. When the Christmas dinner finally ended and the laughter dissolved into shallow goodbyes, I slipped out quietly. The cold night air clung to my coat as I walked back to my apartment. Inside, the silence felt almost kind. I hung my jacket on the same worn hook I had used for years and set a kettle on the stove. The ticking of the metal warming was the only sound in the room. I sat at the small kitchen table, the one that still wobbled on its left leg, and let the evening replay itself. Daniel's voice still rang in my ears. That proud announcement about a Tesla, a gift that had never been real, the clinking glasses, the polite laughter, the way Melissa's smile had frozen when I told the truth. I saw it all again, and I wondered how many times I had allowed his words to replace my own life with something prettier, something shinier, something that erased me. My eyes drifted to the chipped teacup resting on the counter. The rim was cracked, but I had never thrown it away. It had been with me through long shifts, through nights when my hands shook too much to hold anything else. It was not beautiful, it was not expensive, but it was mine. That cup knew the taste of my solitude, the small comfort of hot water after walking home from work at 2 a.m. It knew me in a way no luxury car ever could. As the kettle began to whistle, my mind went further back, past the banquet hall, past the grocery aisles to a field on the edge of town. Daniel was 7 years old then. The sun had been bright, and he had begged me to buy him a kite. I saved coins from extra hours at the diner, and one afternoon I surprised him with a blue kite stitched with white stars. He ran across the grass with his arms stretched wide, the string trembling in his small hands. I remember holding the spool, watching the kite climb into the sky. The wind caught it, pulling harder, lifting higher. Daniel laughed, his voice clear as a bell, and I thought, this is hope. This is the reason I work nights, the reason I bend my back and bite my tongue. For him to run free, for him to see the world as wide and welcoming as that sky. I remember telling myself that one day he would stand on his own and I would fade into the background, quietly proud of the man he had become. But tonight, as I stirred sugar into that chipped cup, I realized something else. Somewhere along the years, my son had not just stood on his own. He had climbed on top of the stories he told about me, stories that painted me generous or confused or grateful, depending on what he needed in the moment. He had taken the mother who once stood in the field holding the kite string and turned her into a prop at his banquet table. I sipped the tea and let the heat burn my tongue. The taste anchored me in the present. My apartment was small, my salary modest, my hands still lined from labor. Yet these were the truths of my life, and the contrast with the lies he told, that sharp difference, cut deeper than any insult ever could. For years I had believed that silence was love. When my husband left and I raised Daniel alone, I stayed silent about the nights I cried in the bathroom, silent about the pain in my joints from scrubbing floors. I believed if I kept quiet, he would never feel the weight of my sacrifice. Silence was my gift. Silence was my shield. But now, staring at the steam rising from my cup, I whispered to myself, I taught him that silence meant love, and now silence has turned me into a shadow. My words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. The chipped cup in my hands felt like a truth I could not discard. It had cracks, but it still held water. I realized so did I. Daniel might have built a reputation on illusions, but I still carried the steady rhythm of real work, real nights, real sacrifices. My silence had been twisted, but my reality could not be erased. That night, I wrote in my notebook, the same one where I sometimes scribbled grocery lists or stray thoughts after work. I wrote, he turned me into a story that was never mine. But I am still here. I am not gone. I closed the book, placed it next to the teacup, and sat very still. Outside, the street lamp flickered and the sound of a late bus rolled by. I thought of the seats, the smell of metal, the way the driver nodded when he saw me every morning. The bus was not glamorous, but it was honest. It carried me where I needed to go. And in that moment, I knew. The truth of my life might not sparkle, but it was real. And sometimes reality itself is the beginning of a reckoning. The morning after that glittering Christmas dinner, I woke to the sound of my neighbor's radio leaking through the wall. The announcer's voice was bright, too cheerful for my weary head. I shuffled to the door, picked up the folded newspaper left in the hallway, and carried it inside. My tea from last night still sat cold in the chipped cup. The headline on the front page nearly made me drop the paper. Businessman Daniel Harper praised as devoted son, gifts mother a Tesla for Christmas. Beneath the title was a glossy photograph. Daniel, beaming, standing beside a cherry red Tesla parked in front of the country club. Melissa posed next to him, one hand on his arm, the other on the polished hood of the car. The caption read, "A family's love shining through success." I stared at the picture until my eyes blurred. My name was in the second paragraph, described as the humble mother who had received her son's generosity with tears of gratitude. But I had shed no tears. I had touched no Tesla. I had only spoken one small truth, and now that truth had been scrubbed out by headlines, replaced with a fairy tale. My hands trembled as I set the paper down. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined the night before. But then my phone buzzed. A message from Janet, an old coworker at the grocery store, lit the screen. "Viv, is this true? Tesla? Thought you still took the bus." I opened the link she sent. Not a polished article, not an official photograph, but a shaky video filmed by someone at the dinner. The sound of clinking glasses filled the background, but my voice cut through, clear, steady. "I still take the bus to work. Tesla? The car you speak of? I have never even seen it." The clip was less than 30 seconds, but already thousands of views had stacked under it. Comments streamed, "Wait, what? Which one is the truth?" Others wrote, "Classic PR stunt. Busted." Some defended Daniel, saying parents get confused. Others said the pain in my voice did not sound like confusion. It sounded like betrayal. Two worlds clashed that morning, the polished headline and the raw clip. Glossy red Tesla in one hand, the shaky truth in the other. The public, hungry for stories, began to argue with itself. Some praised Daniel as a generous son. Others accused him of staging a performance. And through it all, my name was dragged like a ribbon between two teams, pulling opposite directions. I sat at my table, the newspaper beside the chipped teacup, my phone buzzing with notifications I did not ask for. For the first time, I understood. This was no longer a family matter. This was not about a car, or even about one lie told at a dinner. This was a campaign, a carefully crafted image, an illusion built for cameras and investors, polished until it gleamed. And with one unscripted sentence, I had cracked it open. I whispered to myself, "This is not just family anymore. This is a campaign, and I just ruined it without meaning to." The realization chilled me more than the December air sneaking through the window. Daniel had built his world on narratives, stories told at banquets and printed in newspapers. He had painted himself the dutiful son, the successful businessman who remembered his roots, and Melissa had orchestrated the details, the photos, the press releases, the angles of light that made every smile look flawless. But truth is stubborn. It has a way of slipping through, no matter how carefully the curtains are drawn. That day, I went to work as usual. I boarded the bus, the familiar hiss of its doors closing around me. A teenager scrolled on her phone across the aisle, and I caught a glimpse of the video again. My voice, my face, projected into her small screen. She looked at me twice, as though comparing the woman in front of her to the woman on the clip. She did not speak, but her silence felt like recognition. At the grocery store, the fluorescent lights buzzed as I scanned items. A customer, a man I had seen many times before, hesitated before handing me his money. "You're her, aren't you?" he asked softly. I did not answer. I only pressed the buttons, the machine chirping its approval, but inside my chest tightened. I had been invisible for so long. Now I was visible in ways I did not choose. When my shift ended, I walked home through the biting wind. In the window of a diner, a TV blared with a news segment. On one side of the screen, Daniel's smile gleamed beside the Tesla. On the other side, my voice played again, shaky footage looping like a refrain. The anchor asked the question, which version of the story will history believe? I stopped on the sidewalk, my reflection staring back from the glass. I thought of the kite Daniel once ran with, string taut between us. Back then, I believed silence was a gift. Now, silence had been turned into their weapon. And for the first time, I wondered if breaking that silence had been my real gift, not just for myself, but for anyone else lost in someone else's story. That night, back in my apartment, I held the chipped cup again. The tea was hot, steady in my hand, and I promised myself, if they wanted to turn me into a character in their campaign, I would speak only the truth of my own life. My silence had carried enough weight. It was time to let words carry their share. The phone rang late in the evening, just as I was washing my chipped cup for the second time that day. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me, a quiet pull, made me answer. "Mrs. Harper, my name is Sandra Mitchell. I'm an attorney here in Dallas. I saw the video, and I believe you might need help." Her voice was steady, clipped, the kind of tone that belonged to someone who carried facts like armor. For a moment, I didn't know how to reply. Lawyers belong to people with power, with money, with contracts and conference rooms. I had none of those things. I had only my truth, fragile and plain. Still, I agreed to meet her. The next afternoon, we sat at my wobbly kitchen table, the same one Daniel used to do his homework on decades ago. Sandra looked young, early 30s perhaps, but her eyes held a sharpness that came from long nights reading papers most people avoided. She pulled a notepad from her bag. "Show me what you have," she said. I slid a small pile across the table, my pay stubs from the grocery store, each one thin proof of long hours, my bank statements bare except for utilities and bus fare, receipts from the transit pass machine, the ink faded but legible. I watched her eyes scan each page, her brow furrowed not in doubt but in concentration. After a while, she looked up. "These prove you've been supporting yourself, Mrs. Harper. No Tesla, no allowance. Now, let me show you something." From her folder, she pulled out a copy of a document I had never seen before. Across the top, it read, V.H. Trust, my initials, my name beneath in careful script, but the signature at the bottom was not mine. "This trust," Sandra explained, tapping the page, "was created under your name as a supposed vehicle for financial support, except none of the transfers actually reached you. They went elsewhere. Shell accounts, holding companies. It's elaborate, but the trick is simple. They used your name to give legitimacy to their money." My stomach turned cold. I traced the forged signature with my finger. The last letter of my surname sloped wrong, flat where mine always lifted. Someone had tried to dress in my handwriting and failed. Sandra's voice cut through my silence. "Melissa Harper is listed here as the co-signer on related documents. She orchestrated this. Daniel may have played his part, but Melissa built the scaffolding. She forced the accountant to approve filings, and your name became the mask for their laundering." I sat back in my chair, my pulse loud in my ears. So my name wasn't just a story at dinner. It was paper, money, lies with my face on them. Sandra nodded. "Yes, this isn't just deception, Mrs. Harper. This is elder financial abuse. It is fraud, and it is a crime." The word crime hung heavy in the air. For so long, I had thought of this as betrayal, as disappointment, as a son choosing distance over truth. But crime was different. Crime had weight outside family, weight that lived in courts and carried consequences. I poured tea into the chipped cup, my hands steadier than I expected. "All these years," I said softly, "I thought silence was my protection, but they turned my silence into their weapon." Sandra leaned forward, her voice softer now. "You are not alone anymore. We can bring this forward. With your documents and what I've found, we have a foundation. You don't have to carry this by yourself." I looked at her, the sharp lines of her suit, the determination in her gaze, and felt something stir in me. For the first time in years, someone was sitting on my side of the table, someone willing to see me not as a prop, but as a person. I touched the chipped rim of my cup and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Then I suppose," I said, "this is the first time I've had an ally." Sandra smiled faintly, but there was no pity in it, only resolve. "Yes, Mrs. Harper, and the first of many." That night when she left, I sat alone again, but the silence felt different. It no longer pressed on me like a weight. It felt like space, space for truth to move, space for me to breathe. I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence before bed. "My name is no longer their tool. It is mine again." The annual shareholders meeting was held in a hotel ballroom that smelled like new carpet and old money. Chandeliers hovered above a navy stage. I sat near the aisle in a thrifted blazer, my chipped teacup memory tucked in my bag like a talisman. Beside me, attorney Sandra Mitchell tapped a pen on her legal pad. Her calm felt like a rope. Daniel took the stage to practiced applause. A slide deck bloomed with numbers and photos. Ribbon cuttings, scholarships, a glossy red Tesla posed like a promise. He smiled toward the cameras. "Harper Family Holdings had a record year," he said, "and because success must carry responsibility, we expanded the VH Trust. It ensures my mother's dignity and funds community care." The slide brightened. VH Trust in bold, my initials turned into a logo I had never approved. Melissa stood at the aisle with a PR smile that did not reach her eyes. Her phone glowed like a second heartbeat. Daniel continued, every phrase polished. "We provide housing stipends, medical support, and transportation for my mother," he said, pausing, "so she never has to take the bus again." Laughter and claps. Sandra's pen stopped. "You decide when," she whispered. A line had formed for questions. I stood. My legs felt like winter branches, but they held. A staffer lifted a microphone toward me. The screen still displayed my initials, shining over a promise I did not live. "Mrs. Harper." Daniel began, surprised to see me there. I cleared my throat. My voice rang like a small bell. "In the last 2 years, I have not received a dime. I still work a cashier shift." The room did not breathe. Melissa moved first, heels quick. She reached a floor microphone. "She is confused," she said lightly, as if smoothing a wrinkle. "Holiday stress. She often forgets—" I kept the mic steady. "I might forget a bus stop, but I cannot forget a Tesla." A ripple, then stillness. A shareholder in a silver tie raised his hand. "Can we see disbursement statements from the VH Trust?" he asked, voice dry as paper. Sandra leaned toward a nearby mic. "We would welcome those," she said, "and any bank records reflecting deposits into Mrs. Harper's accounts." Daniel's smile thinned. "This is not the appropriate forum." An older woman near the front stood. "It becomes appropriate," she said, "when charity is used as marketing." Heads turned. Phones rose. I slipped bus pass receipts and pay stubs from a folder into Sandra's hand. She lifted them just enough for the nearest camera to catch dates. "These cover 24 months, she said. "No Tesla, no stipend, no transfers." Melissa tried again. "Our accountant—" Sandra spoke over her, soft but immovable. "Will confirm the VH Trust exists in name only. We have a document with a forged signature. The tail on the R is wrong." Daniel gripped the podium. "Mother, please, we can discuss this privately." I looked at him. The boy who once ran with a kite string, the man now holding a string tied to my name. "I asked privately," I said. Silence was all I received. The moderator asked for order. Order arrived as silence, heavy and exact. In it, a knot inside my chest finally loosened. A reporter whispered into her phone. Another tapped a message that lit a lock screen 2 rows over. Attention shifted. People blinked and did not look away. A board member cleared his throat. "Mr. Harper, until this is clarified, I move to table votes on philanthropic allocations and appoint an independent auditor." The motion landed like a gavel before the gavel. Murmurs surged, then faded. Daniel tried to reclaim tempo. "We remain committed to transparency," he said tight. "There are misunderstandings." "Then clear them," the woman in front replied. I lowered the mic. The echo line returned to me. Silence can weigh more than a shout. I chose it. I said nothing else. I simply stood, every inch of me saying, "I am not a prop." Sandra squeezed my elbow, professional and human. "Mini-climax," she murmured. "Now let gravity work." Outside, the air felt sharper, honest in a way fluorescent lights never are. Producers were already arguing about the lower third. The tilt of the public story shifted under our feet. For months, my name had been polished into a logo. With one steady sentence, I had asked the oldest question in America: where is the paper? Behind us, the doors reopened. The meeting resumed without its certainty. Ahead, the hallway stretched like a runway. I folded the empty folder against my ribs and walked beside Sandra, lighter than I had any right to be. The truth had not finished its work, but it had found a microphone. For the first time in years, it had my voice. The week after the shareholders' meeting, the world no longer felt invisible. For months, I had walked with the weight of silence pressed into my chest. Now, every step echoed against headlines and phone calls. Sandra told me it was time to move from suspicion to evidence. She arranged a meeting at a downtown office where an investigator waited with a stack of files that looked taller than my teapot. His name was David Ruiz, a former forensic accountant turned investigator. He wore no tie, only a rumpled shirt and glasses that slid down his nose. But when he opened the folders, his hands were precise, almost surgical. He laid out papers across the table: bank statements, corporate ledgers, photocopies of contracts. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "we traced the VH Trust. At least what they claim is the VH Trust. It's a phantom." Sandra leaned forward, her eyes scanning the numbers like a hunter in the woods. "Show us." David slid one document toward me. A bank account under my name, but the address wasn't mine. The signature at the bottom curled awkwardly, flat where mine always lifted. "None of the deposits ever reached your accounts," David explained. "They were rerouted through shell companies. Here," he tapped a line of transfers. "This one goes to a condo in Melissa's maiden name. This one flows to a holding company in Nevada." I tried to keep my breathing even as the papers blurred before me. My name, used like a skeleton key to open doors I had never touched. Sandra placed her hand gently on mine. "This is the proof we need. They didn't just lie at dinners. They manufactured you on paper." The next file was a contract. My name appeared again, scrawled across the bottom as if I had authorized a loan guarantee. But the pen strokes were foreign, forced, lacking the rhythm of a woman who had signed thousands of checks and field trip slips in her life. "Forgery," Sandra said flatly. "They tried to make Vivian Harper into a brand, not a mother, not a person." I swallowed hard. My name, Vivian Harper, has been turned into a mask. The echo of my own voice in that room startled me. David looked up, his face solemn. "That's exactly right, Mrs. Harper, and masks can hide crime, but they can also be removed." Sandra flipped to another section. We found a witness. The door opened and a man stepped inside. His hair was thinning, his tie knotted loosely as if he had stopped caring about appearances long ago. Sandra introduced him, Robert Kim, former company accountant. He sat across from me, eyes low. "I worked for your son for 8 years," he began. His voice cracked. "I was ordered to sign off on filings for the VH Trust. Melissa was the one who delivered the papers. She told me if I refused, I'd be out the next morning. She reminded me I had 2 kids in college." I watched his hands tremble as he held the edge of a folder. I signed, but every time I knew it was wrong. "Mrs. Harper, I want you to know. I am sorry. I should have said something sooner." His shame filled the room, thick as smoke. For a moment, I wanted to comfort him, to tell him I understood fear. But then I thought of the years I spent on bus seats and grocery shifts while my name was paraded in rooms I never entered. Fear had a cost, and I had paid it. Sandra's tone softened but stayed firm. "Mr. Kim, your testimony will matter. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. We will protect you." He nodded, tears threatening. "Melissa was the one who pushed. Daniel let her, but she was the architect. She wanted to polish the family image. She said your silence made you useful." Those words sank into me like stones. Useful. As if my life had been raw material to carve their legacy. I touched the chipped rim of my teacup, which I had brought with me as a quiet anchor. Its imperfection grounded me, reminded me who I was beyond the pages scattered across that table. Then I whispered the line that rose inside me, slow and certain. "A name cannot be someone else's property. A name belongs only to the one who carries it." Sandra met my eyes. "That's our case, Mrs. Harper. That sentence is our spine. We'll show them your name is yours." I sat straighter. For years, I had shrunk in silence. But in that moment, with evidence laid bare, with witnesses beginning to speak, I felt the first true taste of something I had long forgotten. Not revenge, not victory, but dignity, returning to its rightful owner. The storm did not come quietly. It arrived with headlines flashing across every screen in Dallas. "Harper family under scrutiny." Clips of me at the shareholders' meeting, microphone trembling in my hand, spread faster than any truth I had ever spoken in my life. Reporters camped outside my apartment building. Camera flashes lit the hallway at odd hours, painting my door in strobe-like bursts. Daniel struck first. He appeared on television wearing his most expensive suit, the kind that seemed to carry its own lighting. His smile was strained, stretched too far. Sitting across from a primetime anchor, he leaned in as if confiding. "My mother is confused," he said with a gentle chuckle. "She worked so hard for me all those years. I think sometimes she forgets the details. The VH Trust exists to honor her sacrifices. She may not remember every arrangement, but the intent has always been care." The anchor nodded politely, but the camera caught the hesitation in her eyes. Sandra and I watched the segment on my small television. She muted it halfway through. "He's stalling," she said, "trying to turn you into a fragile elder instead of a credible witness. But the public isn't as easy to steer as he thinks." She was right. Within hours, another video appeared online, cobbled together by someone with more determination than sleep. It began with Daniel's polished interview, then cut sharply to footage from the Christmas dinner. His voice announcing the Tesla, the room's applause, my frozen reply. "I still take the bus to work." Melissa's wine glass trembling in her hand. The contrast hit harder than any editorial could. The video didn't stop there. It spliced in leaked testimony from Robert Kim, the former accountant, his weary face admitting on camera that Melissa had forced him to sign false documents. She said if I refused, I'd be out the next morning. His words landed like hammer blows against Daniel's carefully rehearsed smile. The clip ricocheted across social media. Comments bloomed in thousands. Elder abuse, plain and simple. Imagine using your own mother for PR. She remembers the bus stop, but not the Tesla. That line broke me. I stayed inside. I did not pick up calls. Neighbors left groceries at my door with small notes. "We believe you." The silence I held became louder than Daniel's explanations. Sandra sat across from me at the table, files spread neatly before her. She stirred sugar into her coffee, calm even as the world outside burned with noise. "Do nothing," she advised. "Let the truth breathe. When you stay silent, you give people space to replay what they saw and heard. They will measure it themselves. If you rush to defend, you interrupt their reckoning." I traced the rim of my chipped teacup. Imprisoned once by silence, now I wielded it. I felt its edge, sharp, clean, decisive. Silence was no longer weakness. It was blade. Melissa attempted her own counterstrike. A glossy magazine ran an article titled "The Toll of Caregiving." Photographs showed her in muted lighting, hand pressed to forehead, portraying herself as the weary daughter-in-law burdened by an ungrateful elder. But the internet turned against her quickly. Someone placed the magazine cover side by side with Robert Kim's testimony. "Burdened by care or profiting from fraud?" the caption read. For the first time, Daniel and Melissa's empire seemed to tremble. Sponsorships pulled back quietly. A board member resigned from their foundation with a terse public statement. Talk show hosts debated whether I was a victim of financial abuse or a pawn in a corporate cover-up. Either way, the narrative had shifted. I was no longer invisible. Through it all, I remained still. I cleaned my small apartment, brewed tea, wrote notes in my notebook. Every so often, I looked at the folder Sandra had left on my counter, filled with documents that carried my name twisted into shapes I had never signed. I resisted the urge to shout my truth from the balcony. Instead, I let the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate. The echo line returned to me late one night as the news replayed Daniel's interview beside the viral clips. Silence can weigh more than a scream. Now I understood it fully. My refusal to play their game had become its own kind of testimony. Sandra called the next morning with her voice steady as stone. "The DA is preparing subpoenas. What you're seeing in the press is only the surface. Beneath it, the case is gathering muscle." I exhaled, watching the steam rise from my tea. For decades, I had thought survival meant swallowing every truth until it dissolved. But now I saw that silence could be sharpened, honed into something powerful, not a muzzle, a weapon. The courthouse smelled of paper, polish, and nerves. I sat at the wooden table beside Sandra, the weight of years pressing down on my shoulders. Cameras waited outside, but inside the courtroom there was only stillness, a silence heavy enough to bend my breathing. When my name was called, I rose. My hands trembled only once before finding their balance. The oath felt strange on my lips, not because I doubted it, but because I had already been telling the truth long before this room decided to listen. Sandra's voice guided me gently. "Mrs. Harper, please tell the court what brought us here." I began with Christmas. I told them about the chandelier light, the laughter, the wine glasses, how Daniel had lifted his glass and announced to the room, "Mom loves the Tesla I gave her. She doesn't need the bus anymore." I told them how I froze, how I whispered instead, "I still take the bus to work," and how Melissa's wine glass nearly slipped from her hand. The jurors leaned forward slightly, their faces unreadable, but I felt the air shift. I carried the story forward, the shareholders' meeting, the hollow accounts, the documents Sandra had uncovered. Then Sandra placed a folder in front of me. Inside was the signature, my name, but not my hand. I lifted it carefully, like something fragile and dangerous. My throat tightened. I have signed my name thousands of times, on rent checks, on permission slips, on grocery receipts, and every time I write the R in Harper with a lift at the end. It rises like a kite string catching the wind. I pointed at the document. This signature drags the R down. Whoever wrote this did not know me. They did not know the way my hand lifts when I finish my name. This is not mine. The room grew stiller than before. Even the judge's gavel seemed unnecessary. The silence had already ordered itself. Sandra nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Harper." Daniel's attorney rose. "Mr. Harper, would you explain this?" Daniel adjusted his tie, his voice practiced. "This was a clerical mistake, a paperwork error. These things happen in large organizations. My mother misunderstood. I would never harm her." The juror's eyes stayed on him, searching for conviction that did not arrive. Then Melissa's lawyer stood. She wore a mask of composure, but her hands betrayed her, twisting the cap of a pen. "Mrs. Harper must understand that my client was not responsible for signatures or filings. She trusted the accounting staff. If there were irregularities, they came from the bookkeepers, not from her." The words cracked under their own weight. The prosecutor leaned forward. "Then let us hear from the bookkeepers." Robert Kim was called. His voice shook, but his words did not. He told the court that Melissa had delivered the papers, that she had threatened his job if he refused. He told them she had insisted the trust be reported as active, though no funds ever flowed to me. The defense tried to paint him as bitter, disgruntled. But then came the handwriting expert, a woman with steel gray hair and a stack of enlargements. She pointed to the angle of my H, the curve of my R. She compared it with the forged version. She spoke with the calm of someone who trusted paper more than people. This signature was not written by Mrs. Harper. It is a forgery. The variance is beyond question. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Melissa's face drained of color. Daniel pressed his lips tight, eyes fixed on the table. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will disregard speculation. You will focus on what is before you, the evidence." But the evidence had already done its work. Sandra rose again, her voice steady. "Mrs. Harper, one last question. How did it feel to see your name used this way?" I looked at the jurors. My hands rested on the rail, calm now. A name cannot be someone else's property. A name belongs only to the one who carries it. When mine was stolen, it was as if my life was reduced to a tool for someone else's story. But I am not a prop. I am Vivian Harper, and my name stands with me. Mini climax. The words landed in the silence like a final note in a hymn. The courtroom did not move for several breaths. Then the judge nodded, almost imperceptibly, as if even he recognized the weight of what had been spoken. The trial would continue, with more witnesses, more documents, more arguments. But in that moment, the truth stood uncovered. No smile, no excuse, no polished statement could disguise it again. The second curtain had lifted, and this time, no one could pull it back down. The final day of the trial arrived with skies gray as iron. I sat in the courtroom, palms pressed flat against my lap, the chipped rim of my teacup echoing in memory, though it rested safely at home. The judge's gavel struck, and the room folded into silence. I drew a slow breath, steadying myself. The prosecutor stood, voice clear and deliberate. She turned to the jury, then lifted a printed sheet of text messages projected on the screen. Melissa's words appeared larger than life, impossible to ignore. "Make him sign. Vivian will never check." The gallery gasped. Some shook their heads. My chest tightened at the cruelty, not just of the fraud, but of the confidence. I had been invisible enough for her to believe I would never look. I whispered aloud, barely more than a breath. "I do not need a Tesla. I only need the truth about my name." The jurors heard every word. Their eyes moved toward me, then back to the evidence glowing on the screen. The prosecutor let the silence linger before speaking again. "This is not confusion. This is not a clerical error. This is conspiracy, coercion, and fraud. Daniel Harper and Melissa Harper did not honor their mother. They exploited her. The defense tried their final protest. Daniel's attorney argued that Daniel had relied too heavily on his wife's judgment, that he had made mistakes but never intended harm. Melissa's counsel insisted she was under pressure, that she had been caught between loyalty and fear. Their words fell flat, hollow echoes in a room now filled with truth. The jury filed out. I sat with my breath, caught halfway, as if release would demand too much. Sandra's hand brushed lightly against my arm, a reminder that I was not alone. Minutes passed, heavy and long. Then the door opened and the jurors returned. No faces gave anything away. The foreperson rose, a folded paper in hand. The clerk read aloud. On the charge of elder financial abuse, we find the defendant, Daniel Harper, guilty. On the charge of tax fraud, guilty. On the charge of forgery, guilty. Daniel's head dropped. For the first time, his polished armor cracked. The sentence followed. 15 years. My breath trembled, not from triumph, but from the weight of hearing my son's name bound to prison walls. The clerk continued. On the charge of conspiracy, we find the defendant, Melissa Harper, guilty. On the charge of coercion, guilty. On the charge of fraud, guilty. Melissa's hands clutched the table, knuckles white. The sentence, 20 years. The mastermind faced longer than the man she had guided. The gallery stirred. Murmurs rippled through strangers' throats. Reporters scribbled furiously. I sat still, my gaze on the wooden rail before me. My body did not leap in victory, did not cry out for satisfaction. Instead, I exhaled, long and soft, as if air had been trapped in me for decades. Justice had arrived, but it did not glitter. It carried no celebration. It sat like a scale settling back into balance. Sandra whispered, "It's over." I shook my head gently. Not over. Just set right. The judge thanked the jury, dismissed the court. The gavel fell one last time. People stood, shuffled, whispered. Daniel did not look at me as officers led him out. Melissa lifted her chin as if defiance might still protect her, but her eyes betrayed her. Fear had finally reached her. I remained seated, palms against the bench. My voice stayed low but firm. Justice is not joy. It is only balance restored. The words echoed back to me, clear and steady, as though the room itself agreed. When I finally rose, the courtroom lights caught the lines of my face, not with pity, but with recognition. I walked slowly toward the exit, each step lighter than the last. For years, my name had been stolen, twisted, paraded as a tool. Now it was mine again, Vivian Harper, not a trust, not a deduction, a woman, whole. The morning after the verdict, the headlines spread like wildfire. Every paper on every newsstand carried the same refrain: the Harper couple brought down. Photographs showed Daniel being led away in cuffs, his once polished suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow. Melissa's image appeared beside his, face pale and defiant but undeniably broken. Their empire, built on lies and glitter, had finally collapsed under the weight of truth. I returned to my small apartment quietly, away from the noise of reporters and the constant hum of speculation. My keys turned in the lock with the familiar scrape, but this time my hand did not tremble. Inside, the air was the same, faintly scented with tea leaves and detergent. But it felt different. It felt like it belonged to me again. I set the kettle on the stove and waited. For years, that act had been one of survival, a way to fill silence too heavy to bear. Today, it was something else. As the steam rose and the kettle whistled, I realized my hand was steady, not a shake, not a quiver. The storm had passed through me, and I remained standing. I poured the tea into my chipped cup, the same one that had carried me through nights of exhaustion, nights when Daniel's future mattered more than my sleep. I sat at the table, opened my notebook, and wrote, "The truth does not need to scream. It only needs to stand upright." I closed the notebook slowly, running my palm across its worn cover. Those words were not for the world. They were for me. A reminder that the loudest battles are not always fought with voices, but with presence, with patience, with the simple act of refusing to disappear. From the window, I saw the bus rumble past, its brakes hissing at the corner. The same bus I had ridden countless mornings, shoulders pressed against strangers, eyes fixed on the floor. But today, I smiled. I was still taking the bus, yes, but I was no longer a shadow inside it. The world had finally seen me. Evening fell, bringing with it the hush that only comes after great noise. I brewed another cup of tea, savoring the calm. The city outside carried on, horns, footsteps, laughter. But my apartment was an island. I thought about the trial, about Daniel's face when the sentence was read, about Melissa's mask cracking under evidence too sharp to deny. I felt no victory in it, only balance, as if the scales had been quietly set back where they belonged. It was close to midnight when I heard the scrape at the door. A soft sound, paper against metal. I walked over and saw it. A white envelope sliding through the slot, landing on the rug with a dull whisper. I bent to pick it up. On the front, written in rushed, uneven ink, was a single word, Daniel. I stood there, the envelope in my hand, the weight of it out of proportion to its size. My son's name, my son's hand, a plea, perhaps, a confession, a wound wrapped in paper. I carried it to the table and set it beside my teacup. The steam rose between us, a fragile curtain. My fingers lingered on the flap, but I did not break the seal. Some doors open only with truth, and some doors must remain closed, guarded by silence. I leaned back, listening to the city breathe, the envelope still unopened. My tea cooled and I let it. Tonight I chose not to read. Tonight silence was the truest word I could speak. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Vivian Harper, not erased, not borrowed, not disguised, just myself, steady, present, and unshaken. The envelope sat on the table all through the night, a quiet intruder in my apartment. It seemed almost alive, pulsing with a weight I could feel every time I glanced at it. Daniel's handwriting stretched across the front, hurried and uneven, as though he had written it through clenched teeth or trembling hands. I boiled water for another cup of tea, the whistle of the kettle louder than it needed to be in the stillness. My hands stayed steady. I poured, I stirred, I sat. The envelope waited. For a long time, I simply looked at it. My son's name, a son I had once carried in my arms through winters harsher than this one. A boy who had flown a kite with me on a windy hill, shouting with laughter when the string pulled against his small fists. That same boy had grown into a man who used my name to polish his own. And now he wrote to me from behind bars. What could be inside? An apology, a confession, a plea for forgiveness? Or another trick, another attempt to pull me back into the role of silent prop? The truth is, I did not know. And perhaps I did not need to. I brushed my fingertips lightly over the paper, then pulled my hand back. The envelope felt like a door, and I had learned enough about doors to know not all of them should be opened. Whispering to the empty room, I said, "A mother's love does not vanish, but it cannot cover a crime." The sound of my own voice startled me, low and firm. For so many years I had spoken softly, as though even my truth should apologize for existing. Now the words came steady, as if my soul had finally claimed its rightful pitch. I slid the envelope into the top drawer of my desk, beside the notebook where I had recorded every detail of this journey. The late shifts, the empty fridge, the signatures, the lies, the trial. I shut the drawer slowly, listening to the small click as wood met wood. Not destroyed, not opened, just kept in the dark. And in that act, I left the letter unfinished, an unanswered call, a wound without bandage. I could almost hear the audience in my own life, the neighbors, the reporters, the strangers online, asking the question that now hummed in my chest. Will she forgive him? Will she ever open it? I did not answer them. I did not even answer myself. Because forgiveness is not a switch. It is a long road, sometimes never walked. It is a choice renewed with every sunrise. And tonight, I chose silence. I stood by the window, lifting the chipped cup to my lips. Outside, the bus hissed as it slowed at the corner, doors opening to let passengers climb aboard. I smiled faintly. I still rode the bus, but I was no longer a shadow inside it. The room was quiet, the drawer closed, the envelope resting where it could wait. Not all stories need tidy endings. Some live in the tension between love and betrayal, between memory and survival. Perhaps one day I will open it. Perhaps I will never need to. Either way, the letter does not define me. I turned back to the table, my tea cooling, my body steady. I wrote one final line in my notebook before setting the pen down. Some doors open with truth. Others stay closed, guarded by silence. And with that, I closed the notebook and let the night hold me, not with fear, but with unfinished grace. The world would wonder. I would let them. Months passed after the verdict, and the rhythm of my life slowly changed. The courtroom had faded into memory, yet its lessons lingered in every quiet breath I took. I no longer carried the weight of secrecy. Instead, I carried something lighter, something that felt like responsibility. One afternoon, I stood at the front of a modest community center, the kind of place where folding chairs creak and the smell of coffee seeps into the walls. Before me sat rows of elders, men and women with tired eyes but open hearts. They had come not for spectacle, but for survival, to learn how to protect themselves in a world that too often pretends they are invisible. I held up a folder. Inside were simple things: receipts, bus passes, bank statements, utility bills, documents most people overlook until it is too late. I told them my story, not with names or trials, but with truth plain enough to matter. I was once like many of you, I said, my voice steady. I believed silence was love. I thought keeping records meant I didn't trust my family. But silence is not love, and trust without proof can become a trap. Don't let silence be the last inheritance you leave behind. The room was quiet. Faces leaned forward. Some nodded. Others stared at the floor with a heaviness I recognized all too well. I set down my chipped teacup, the one I had carried as a reminder of endurance, and let my eyes meet theirs. Keep every receipt. Save your bank statements. Write down the dates and the amounts. Protect your name, because a name is not just letters. It is the history of who you are. At the back of the room, a woman raised her hand. Her voice wavered, but her words cut deep. What if we are already too late? What if our children have already taken from us? I paused, letting her question rest in the air. Then I answered softly, "Then you are not alone, and being heard is the first step to taking yourself back. It is never too late to let the light in." I closed my folder and repeated the words that had become my compass. The doors are open now. Let the light do its work. That line, once only for me, now belonged to all of us. After the session ended, people lingered. Some touched my hand. Some whispered their own hidden stories. I listened because listening is another way of lifting weight from someone else's shoulders. When I finally stepped outside, the late afternoon sun fell across the street, and for the first time in a long time, I felt not just steady, but hopeful. I had not chosen revenge. I had chosen something quieter, stronger, healing. passing on the lesson, that truth, once. Spoken does not belong to one person alone. It multiplies. Now, before I close this chapter with you, I want to leave a question in your hands. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee in your hand, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Tell us in the comments. We read every word with gratitude, and if this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, not only to hear more stories like mine, but to join a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. Remember, sometimes miracles do not knock on your door. They wait quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Take care. And until the next story, keep the light close.